All right, everyone. We're going to have a number of individuals trickling in here, so I appreciate everybody coming back. Definitely looking forward to this afternoon's activity. So first and foremost, thank you all. Thank you for the excellent presentations we've had up to this point, and especially to the provinces and territories for their updates this morning. Al, I see your camera on. Do you have something you'd like to add?
No, Evan, I thought I'd just support you here just in case you needed something. I'm just here for moral support.
Perfect, I appreciate it, thank you. So just as we're about to get started here with the afternoon, so we've had a number of interesting talks and some things crop up. I mean, obviously we've got this sorted, it's an easy problem, there's no complications, and it's all simple stuff. The science is straightforward, policies are clear. I kid. It's very complicated. There's a lot going on. And I know after 2.5 days, you're all probably feeling rather tired. I know I found it strange this morning to wake up and throw on a blazer and a pink shirt and then come down to my basement. And you notice the pink shirt, my daughter asked about it this morning and I said it was for bullying, and she looked at me strangely and I said, I mean, to stand up against bullying, it's not in support of bullying, which highlights that ever-present issue we've touched on today of communication is key and effective contextualized communication is even better. So this afternoon we have breakout sessions on the agenda. We are going to have 4 provincial territorial breakout sessions where we'll be focusing upon what the province and territories have to say. Each group has had a ECCC facilitator and note taker assigned to it, as well as a member from our modeling groups out of Dorval to observe. We're there to facilitate, answer questions, but the conversation is really about what the province and territories see as priorities and such. The province and territories were provided with a survey prior to this. They responded to it. Responses were collated and submitted back to them, and 3 proposed survey questions were also provided. So that's what's going to be happening for the provinces and territories. For those not already assigned to those, here in the main room, there will be a larger discussion on the research side of things led by members of Global Water Futures, and everyone is invited to stay and attend that. So before we get started, I will turn it over to Al to see if he's got anything to bring up, and then there's a couple more things I have to say.
Yeah, thanks, Evan. I just to let the folks on the research side know that we'll be meeting in a separate room. We'll have small presentations from the folks involved with the GWF forecasting team. And what we'd like to do is get some feedback from folks about sort of some priority research areas where they think we might want to move down the road with respect to research, and then we'll come back and report back to the plenary as well. So yeah, looking forward to the discussion on the research side as well. And those of you who don't know, aren't in the provincial territorial meetings, you're all welcome to come to the research sidebar discussions. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you, Al. We've made a quick executive decision on the breakout rooms. There's only going to be 4. We're going to leave everyone else in this main room, if only because of, honestly, the joys of dealing with teams and shunting people around due to self-selection. So apologies, we had to make a quick change on that. So there you have it. So if you're not in one of the provincial territorial breakout groups, you won't be assigned, so just stay in this main room. For those people who are going over to the breakout sessions, when you'll be prompted to move over, it'll happen automatically, and then at the very end, you're going to want to click return, not leave. Leave will take you right out of the meeting. It'll just be return. We're about to get started. For those people who are anticipating being moved into a breakout session, in the event that you don't get moved, just raise your hand and Brendan will move you over. And lastly, this should be very interesting. It's going to be quite the afternoon. It's fascinating seeing how we're all handling things. And I mean, this is a strange time doing a virtual session. I mean, I think after day 3 of an in-person meeting, we'd all be feeling tired and looking forward to moving around. However, we're doing our best. You'll notice incredible backgrounds in other people's homes or their children or what have you. I'm here with just beige doors. It's like the nexus of all bureaucracy. Behind me, there's just, you open them and more questions and such come up. Anyways, with that, I'll ask Brendan to open up the breakout sessions, and for the main room, I'll pass it over to Al for the research session.
Yeah, we'll give it 2 minutes so people can make the moves and finish the copies.
Perfect. Thank you, Al.
Okay. So yeah, I'll start up in about 2 minutes. So I think we've got everybody. So it looks like we've got about 30 people here, give or take. Hang on a second. Oh, coordinating. Okay, so I thought maybe what we do is there's a bit of an agenda here that we want to go through. It is sort of focused on the GWF forecasting team in a sense, just because it was a starting point, right? But a lot of you aren't involved with GWF or have other interests, right? And so happy to hear from everybody. I just want to sort of explain some history and context with respect to this flood forecasting team or group, not the one here, but the larger picture, right? And so I don't know if folks know the history, but you know, from a Canadian perspective, the provinces and territories are responsible for the flood forecasting in Canada, and there's been very little coordination really at the national level within Canada on flood forecasting. And as you saw from the presentations today, you know, all the provinces do things slightly different, which is fine. I mean, it's part of the way we operate in Canada. There's nothing wrong with it. But, you know, given the advances in numerical weather prediction and some of the work that you've all been involved with over the years with modeling or uncertainty analysis or hydraulics, there tends to be a bit of a gap, I guess, in terms of moving things forward within Canada. And so in my old job under ECCC, you know, we had substantial funding to update and modernize the National Hydrological Service. And I'm sure a lot of you are aware of that in 2018, we got sort of a $90 million fund to update our infrastructure and do some innovation and all that. But part of that was actually to look at developing a national flood guidance system, if you like. So if you think of the parallels we heard from the ECMWF folks with flooding and talking on Monday, the way they do things in Europe is kind of similar to what we need to do in Canada, right? Where you have jurisdictions that are responsible. So in Europe, it's the countries, the member countries of the EU, but in Canada, it's the provinces. But the process is about the same, right? And so the way we envisioned all this working in Canada was to have ECC produce numerical products and make them available to the provinces, and then the provinces would take those products and put them through their systems to shape forecasts, and hopefully we get some economies of scale in pushing that forward and doing all that. So that's kind of the context of how it works in Canada for those of you who aren't completely clear. And so there's a role for ECCC here, and they've got till 2023 to figure that out. And there's obviously the role for the provinces and territories, right? So from a research perspective, it gets a little tricky because it's not one agency that you go to, and unlike the US where NOAA is really in charge, it's a little different in Canada, right? And so there's some local needs, there's provincial territorial needs in terms of research, as you saw from the discussions. There's also needs, I think from a research perspective for ECCC, they've got a strong research program, but I'm sure there's innovations and other things that would reach out to universities and others for help with, right? And so we're trying to address that a little bit with the GWF in terms of our hydrological forecasting theme that we've developed. So a couple of thematics that we're looking at in that group is looking at sort of systems development, things like, and Martin's familiar with this one, the SHARP system that was developed at NCARS for scheduling and forecasting. I mean, a lot of provinces and territories talked about the FUSE system. There's other systems as well, right? So there was some possible efforts along those lines that we want to do in our hydrological forecasting group. There's some basic hydrological prediction development that we want to do, things like downscaling, data assimilation, ensembles, uncertainty analysis, some efforts there. And then the last thing we're looking at is some test beds for hydrological prediction and how we put that together. So we thought about the Bow River coming into Calgary, and then maybe the Grand River in Southern Ontario or others. Basically to set up some prototype testing areas that might be of interest, right? So the leads in the study are myself, Carl-Eric Lindenschmidt. You saw a lot of his work actually being implemented in Newfoundland, which is great to see. Martin Clark, John Pomeroy, Pauline Coulibaly out of McMaster, and James Craig out of Waterloo. So those are the people that have a vested interest or have people engaged in this effort. So we have a few postdocs dedicated to those efforts in the group. We're a small group. I should mention also we have collaborators involved with this group, and so it's Andy Wood out of the US, Florian Pappenberger as well, Vincent Fortin, Vincent Bionnet, and Jimmy Lin, who's the data person out of computer scientist out of University of Waterloo. And so we're kind of at the early days of this hydrological forecasting group. We've met once since phase 2 of GWF started, and part of the rationale for that was we spent a lot of time organizing this meeting and getting this going. So this will be a pretty big deliverable out of the GWF program, and certainly out of the forecasting group is this actual meeting with some a little bit of meat on the bone, if you want, if you like, for the report that's come out of this, right? But I think now we're in a position to start really focusing some efforts on the forecasting side and making sure that we're all on the same page with respect to what we want to do. And like I said, I think it would be good to have some thoughts from people on where we want to go and where we can maybe take this community of practice down the road with respect to sort of a Canada-wide initiative. So hopefully that lays out a little bit of the context for all of this. I hope that makes sense for everybody. So maybe now is a good time to take questions from folks if there are any, or concerns or clarifications. So I think we'll have to use put your hands up, and hopefully that all works. So any questions or concerns? Okay, not everybody's doing their emails, I hope. Okay, so we can get started right away here, I think. So just to maybe prompt some discussions, we'll get the a few talks from folks who are tied, some of the PDFs and PhD students tied directly into our group with the forecasting team at a GWF. Sorry, I'm just bringing up another screen here. So we've asked everybody to give a kind of a 2-3 minute elevator speech on what they're working on, and we can start with, well, Louise, we already heard you talk the other day, but if you want to start with your elevator speech, that would be great. I'm assuming you're on. I can't see everybody at one level here, but.
Hi, Al. Yeah, I'm on. And could I be able to share my screen as well to show some slides? And I know most people heard my talk already yesterday, but just to.
I think so. Pravin, how do we do that? Is that possible, or?
Yeah, I think so.
Oh yeah, there we go. Okay. So it's not allowing me to. Do you see my slides, or is it something else?
No, we see your slides.
Oh, brilliant. Okay. Sorry about that. It's the first time I actually do it in Teams. All right. So let me put this in presentation mode. So that's mostly a recap of what I presented yesterday. But I thought it'd be useful to just give a quick summary as well. So I'm a postdoc, and I started working with Martin Clark's team almost a year ago now, so with GWF and working on seasonal streamflow forecasting. So Al mentioned ECMWF in the talk we heard on Monday, and I moved from across ECMWF, and I do see this this kind of parallel with the different countries in Europe and Canada. So that was interesting to hear about today. So I work on streamflow forecasting on seasonal timescales, and as we know, this is important for many water sectors throughout Canada. But the skill, as some of the partners mentioned today, is still quite limited on seasonal timescales. So the idea really of the work we're doing is trying to understand what the predictability is on these timescales, quantify it, and then try and communicate it so that we can move forward, essentially. So if I move to the next screen. So I presented already some of these results. So just quickly to say what I've been working on this last year almost. We've been working together with Vincent Vionnet, Fortin, and well, Al as well, and then Andy Wood from NCAR on developing 2 different streamflow forecasting systems or workflows for across North America. So you have on the left-hand side the data-driven one with snow water equivalent data and some models, ordinary least square regression models, and so on. And then on the right-hand side, you have the process-based forecasting workflow. So that's more based on the SUMA model, and then it generates forecasts from that. So these are both ensemble forecasting systems. And we're testing them right now for some river basins throughout Canada, but the idea is really to try and extend that then to the whole continent, which will be another challenge. And then the second big part of my work is trying to quantify these predictabilities that we see on seasonal timescales. So here I circled in orange the hydrological predictability that you have from the land. So knowing what your snow is, your soil moisture, groundwater, things like that. And then in blue is the meteorological predictability. So things that you get from precipitation, temperature, and so on. And if you look on the right-hand side, is streamflow skill elasticities, and these tell you essentially what the impact of improving either of these predictability sources would, so what impact it would potentially cause on your streamflow scale. And so the higher the skill elasticity, the more impact that predictability source has on your forecast. So this can help us then kind of guide the resources that we have for developing forecasts and hopefully get better forecasts at the end of the day. Yeah, that's all for me.
Great, thanks a lot, Louise. So I'll ask if there's any questions, and I certainly have a few comments, but any questions from anybody on Louise's work? Kurt?
Yeah, it'd be really interesting to see the outcome of the S2S. That's something we've been looking at a lot recently. We rely heavily on historical data, but I'm also wondering if you're seeing either sorts of spatial patterns, or the method either works or it doesn't, because we've tried a couple of different methods and we found either they're doing quite well or they're doing quite poorly, and it's kind of either or so far.
Yeah, it's definitely, so I haven't done a continental analysis yet for North America or Canada, but from my experience in working in Europe, for example, it's definitely something that we've seen. It's either it works really well because you have these predictability sources that you can rely on, or you don't have them and you need to find some completely different methods. So it's definitely going to be interesting to develop a system at the continental scale that can provide valuable information locally for all of these different locations. Yeah, very good question and comment.
Thanks, Kurt. And that's maybe something you might want to be engaged with through GWF with time as well, right? Because I think on OPG is part of the team. I believe there was a letter of support written way back, so we can certainly keep you posted on some of that. Certainly what I found interesting, Louise, is the crisscrossing of the curves, right?
Mm-hmm.
Intuitively, you wouldn't expect that, right? You'd expect them to kind of diverge and keep going, and they don't,
yep.
Right? So do you have any idea why that's the case? Like, have you investigated that a little bit, or? So
you mean why at the end they start merging back together? Or?
Yeah, and they sort of split apart and they come together, then split apart again, right?
Yeah.
And it seems counterintuitive, just based on kind of what we know about initial conditions, how they influence things, right? So.
Well, so that's true. My take on that is at the start you would expect to see an increasing impact from initial conditions because it takes time for groundwater to seep back up and things like that. So that's why it increases at the start. And then the longer you go, the more you're expecting your meteorological forecast to take over the initial conditions because these were off. And then they probably come back together because you're starting to go into the 1 year lead time when I don't think very much happens in both of these forecasts at these lead times. They probably just blend with climatology, and I'm not even sure it's worth looking at these actually.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, any other questions for Louise? I see another hand, but I'm not sure. Oh, Pierre, vas-y.
Bonjour Louise, désolé, j'ai manqué ta présentation hier. It's just a try to answer the question that Al asked before.
Mm-hmm.
Indeed, when you start, probably you see the impact of the snow on the ground produced by the initial conditions. But as you have seen, the predictability of the precipitation is very low in these systems, and the capacity to construct a new snow on the ground for the future can be a problem. What is very interesting that we see in our system, in the seasonal forecasting system, is the capacity or la précision for the temperature. It's not too bad compared to the precipitation, and this can have an important impact for the country here. If we can have a good snow on the ground, a good knowledge of snow on the ground, and a good forecast relatively good forecast for the temperature, then we could derive very interesting products.
All right. Yeah, great. Thanks for this comment. And then have you seen if evaporation is also a big contributor or?
Okay, I cannot, and I don't know, but it's clear that do you know Hylin here, and do you know this person Hylin? No?
No, I don't know.
Okay, we could organize something between Hy is developing for us the seasonal, because in the country we have two systems in development, systems that comes from the climate climate groups, which is a system working at low resolution, and also another component now with the GEM model running at higher resolution, and also fully coupled with the ocean and ice forecasting system. And what we want in the future, it's to include also the new land surface model in the system to improve the scale of the forecast for the temperature and so.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. So I'll Pierre, I'll ask you can hook up with Louise and introduce concepts. Just so people know that traditionally it was the climate modeling community that did the seasonal forecast, but that's now moving to be kind of a hybrid, right, between the numerical weather folks, and so that makes for an interesting challenge. But I think there's some real benefits to that too. And I'll put a place marker here for everybody. In that, we're going to go back to plenary and talk, and the one thing that was never really discussed was seasonal forecasting, except for Louise. And so during the, amongst the provinces and territories, and I'm not sure why, because it could be because some of the reservoir operators, are not in the flood forecasting groups and whatever. So I think that's something we need to consider under GWF and under this forecasting group, because seasonal forecasting is important. We might not have the right players in the provinces and territories at the table. So, we'll bring that up as something we should consider, right? Because for planning purposes, obviously, Louise, that your work is very important, right? So,
that sounds great.
Okay, merci beaucoup. Thank you.
Merci.
And, we'll go to Dave. Dave, are you ready to sort of talk about what you're looking at and working on, and hopefully your presentation, if you have one, you can put one up?
Yes, I am. I'll just share my presentation now.
Sure.
So I'm happy that I get to present after Louise and after that discussion, because I think it's a very natural lead-in. Also with what Pierre said, that we need two components to make good forecasts. One is the actual meteorological forecast, and the other is snow on the ground. So really my PhD is about modeling that snow on the ground, and with the express purpose of how do we get the current state of the snow in the best shape that we can. So for forecasting today, how do we get that best state of the snowpack is really the whole point of the PhD. So if you see my screen, I have a little schematic here. The title is a little descriptive, so we're using ensemble data assimilation of snow in order to improve streamflow forecasts. So we begin in our landscape, a mountainous and flat landscape that has some snow areas, some areas with snow and some with not. And we need to begin by, of course, underlying hydrological modeling, and we're using physically based hydrological models, so the SUMA framework in this case, and combining a lot of information in order to discretize and make our initial models, but really just start to look at how is snow actually modeled on the landscape. And then the next thing we will do, excuse me, I will advance my slide here, is along with the model that we have running and running off of current data, we also have measurements. So we have in situ measurements like Vincent Vianney was talking about, and then we also have measurements from remote sensing and other sources. So the model has a certain amount of skill and information to it, and so do the measurements. And the idea with data assimilation, whatever method you use, is to best use both those informations in order to get your estimate of the snowpack. So that is the core of the thesis, is how do you use the model and the near real-time measurements in order to get the best estimate of the snowpack. And then we want to do that in order to evaluate improvements in streamflow forecasting. So we could look at this on a seasonal scale, as has been discussed, or you could look at it on a shorter time scale also for flood forecasting as well. The top right image here sort of gives a little schematic of how the data assimilation can work. So you have an idea of your state that's in your model, your snowpack, you have measurements, and you combine them optimally in order to get a output estimate. And we're using ensemble methods, so we're representing the uncertainty in some of our model states by using an ensemble of model states. And specifically, we will use a particle filter. So yeah, that's sort of the overview.
Great, thanks a lot, Dave. Appreciate that. Any questions for Dave. I certainly have a few comments, and I'm sure others will as well. Oh, there's Kurt again. Kurt, go ahead.
Sorry, it's me again. One thing, Dave, are you focusing, like I can see the satellite, we have the GMONs floating around, we have snow surveys. Do you have a particular data set you're focusing on?
It's a good question, Kurt. It's something that we're still evaluating, but it will be a combination of in situ data, very likely optical sensing, and then we will need to look at, I'm interested in what we can exploit from also active radar, SAR, synthetic aperture radar, in order to improve it. But that will certainly be, that's a key question, right? Is what kind of information content do we have from each of these sources? So from optical, if we only get the extent of the snow, how much value does that have? And then also, can we exploit information from these other data sources? But in short answer, no, it's not settled exactly what products will be used.
Okay, thanks a lot, Dave. Any other questions? I mean, we saw some similar work coming out of Quebec too, right? When the Quebec Forecasting Group was talking about their work. So there might be some good partnerships to discuss there. I will mention one thing that's sort of coming from an operational data agency for 15 years is what we tend not to think about, and I think we should, and maybe we can jot this down as something possible, is observation networks are cost limited. At the end of the day, that's the bottom line, right? And we always look at networks of opportunity, right? Where is there some data I can grab to do whatever? And we don't optimize our networks at all with respect to where we should locate our gauges, you know, how many snow gauges should we use? How do we supplement that with satellite information? I mean, there's really not a lot of work bringing all that together, right? And so I think, Dave, this affords a bit of an opportunity to, not for your thesis, mind you, but for down the road, for people to start looking at that, right? Because I know from having run a big organization for all those years, the pressure to cut and the pressure to keep your costs down is huge, right? And if you can show the value of the data and how it, you know, fits into a flood forecasting system or a seasonal forecasting system or whatever, it's a big win, right? For everybody. So anyways, I think that's something we should consider. Not in your thesis, as I said, Dave, but maybe something to consider as sort of a placeholder for something we want to look at. And I saw another hand go up. I'm sorry, I'm not sure who, I can't tell, but whoever it is can just speak up.
I saw. I'm not sure if I'm the only one with the hand up, but yes. So very interesting. This is obviously an area we're working on quite actively. We've had a bit of success with some fairly simple deterministic methods for data assimilation, just because we didn't have yet the ensemble version of our system to work with. We are certainly interested to move into an ensemble data assimilation system. One thing that you must keep in mind, and we must keep in mind, is the uncertainty on the real-time observations. That's going to be critical for any data assimilation system, and that's probably something we can work together on, because it's, again, to use Martin Clark's phrase, it's model agnostic, right? We can come up with estimates of useful estimates of observation error, and I'm not talking here about too much about the observation error in the final quality controlled observations from NHS, but the real-time stuff. So can I show something scary on my screen?
Sure, Buzzy.
So I don't know how to share. Okay, I think I can do. Okay, so currently in our system, in version 1 of our data estimation system, we actually trust the observation 100%. This is showing the water level in green at the Richelieu River at Friars Rapid, and in orange it's the flow, right? Estimated, of course. This is provisional, but this is what we have to work with, right, for data assimilation. And it's actually fine, you see, because the technician is actually correcting it in pseudo real time, a few days after the fact, to get the mean flow kind of right. And he's doing a good job, but this is not 24/7. It's, I guess, on a best effort basis, a few days after the fact. And obviously, this peak from going with the flow going from 160 to 250 is completely artificial. So this is ice effects, right? So we can assimilate the data possibly to get an estimate of base flow, but not the last 3 days, right? And sometimes it's going to be not the last week, or depends on the site very much, right? So we have to keep this in mind and come up with smart ways of assessing the uncertainty in the observation. Something we can work on together.
I think Vince, the first comment I wanted to address also with University of Sherbrooke. Indeed, I'm in conversation with Mary Emily in that group, and I'm very appreciative and happy to work with Environment Canada, also with Vincent Vianney and Camille Garneau, who I've been speaking with about this. And I certainly take your comment, Vincent. I think it's also an existential question to the research as well, is that is it something that you keep offline where you have somewhat synthetic data, which is reanalysis, or when do you move that into the actual operational domain where these real questions of the data as it's processed coming in? And of course, these uncertainty concerns are key to the data assimilation overall. It's the basis of it, certainly.
But if you design something that works with past observed data that has gone through all the quality control, it's going to fail in production.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, and I think maybe we'll jot that down as something that the forecasting group needs to consider, right, as we move forward. So, and that's good advice for your thesis too, Dave. Write that down and put it in your thesis. Okay, thank you very much. I saw a question from Martin. I thought Kurt as well, unless it's a legacy hand from Kurt. So I'll start with Martin first. I think that's Martin. MC, yeah, Martin.
Yeah, it is me. I'm sorry, I was having trouble finding the mute button. This is a really good discussion. This is part of the reason why Andy Wood developed the SHARP system in the first place, because he was getting upset about all of these data assimilation papers being published, which were using retrospective information and not really addressing the problems that we have in real-time forecasting systems. So one of the key aspects of developing the SHARP system was to have all of the evaluation done in real time and having to deal with all of the problems that you have with a real-time forecasting system that you don't have in more pristine type university development environments. So what he's done is he's extended all of the ensemble forcings that we had developed in the US, and got a real-time component of the ensemble forcings, and that's something that we'd have to develop as part of the work that we're doing with Dave and Louise, because that's going to be a huge additional source of uncertainty that we need to characterize much more precisely than we have in some of these retrospective analyses. So it's really just a comment rather than a question, just to say, yeah, completely agree. I think you're exactly right. That's a key component that we need to look at.
Okay, great. Thanks for those comments, Martin. And Kurt, is that a legacy hand, or did you have another follow-up?
No, I just gonna follow up on the question, and actually both Martin and Vincent's comments as well. And I don't know, maybe there's an opportunity to look at some sort of a database where we have these sorts of known issues. Like, we know where we have some water survey gauges, and we've called the people back out, and the gauge loses water. It doesn't make sense compared to upstream and downstream, and no one can seem to figure out why, but that is the data. And specifically looking at snow, we publish all of our snow survey information through the province as well. But we do have sites. You go there one year, you collect your snow surveys, you go back the next year and someone's clear cut it. And of course that makes a difference in your snow survey results. So like, those are things you really need to consider. You can't just take some of the data as being accurate.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And from the water survey perspective, we are looking at uncertainty analysis in the data. We've got a project with Martin and Jim Freer on that, but it's a tough nut to crack, right? Because it's all interpreted data, so it's not obvious how to do that. So appreciate those comments. I see another hand up, but I'm not sure who it is. So whoever it is can speak up.
It's me, Marco. Dave, very nice work. I wanted to ask, you had mentioned about the possible use of radar data. Have you looked into what forward models you'll be using?
I can't hear you for some reason. Dave, you're on mute.
Sorry, did you mean as a radiative transfer model, or what kind of forward model? No. And I really enjoyed your presentation, Marco. I owe you an email because I wanted to follow up with you and discuss. But the short answer, no, do not know.
Okay. I think all you're going to end up picking up with radar is where the snow's melting, right? I mean, that's a pretty clear signal, at least in the high relief areas, right? So that might be all you end up picking up. I think SWE from radar is never going to happen. I thought so. Okay. Vincent,
just wanted to say perhaps never going to happen is too strong of a word for open environments. We're working on a new satellite mission with CSA, so there's hope, but in forested environments and mountain regions, not in my lifetime, perhaps.
Okay, Martin, did you have a legacy hand, or did you have another point?
You wanted.
Oh, sorry, that's Marco. Marco, that was.
Yeah, I thought I took my hand down. Sorry.
Two MCs.
Sorry, my hand was raised. Sorry about that.
No, there's two MCs. That's my confusion. Okay, and Pravin.
I just wanted to say that we have just 10 minutes left and 2 more presentations to go, so maybe we should continue.
Yeah, sorry, I got carried away. Okay, so we'll go to Apurba Das. He's going to give a little quick presentation on his stuff, and then Chris, you're after that. So.
Well, thank you. Can I share my screen?
So yeah.
I have to get the permission to share my screen, actually.
Do you mind just raising your hand quickly so I can?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Thank
you. Let me know if you are seeing my presentation. Is everyone seeing my presentation?
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for giving me opportunity to talk in this forum. So my name is Apurba. I'm working with Dr. Carl Erik Lindenschmidt. Today I'm going to present some of our works along the St. John River in the context of iGEM flood forecasting. St. John River flows from United States to Canada, and our main focus is for this river from Dickey to Grand Falls. And we are trying to do some spring iGEM flood forecasting, as well as mid-winter iGEM flood forecasting. And eventually, we'll be trying to do some climate change impacts assessment on iGEM flooding. So for this, we are using different sources of data, including remote sensing, Sentinel-1 and 2, gauge data, meteorological data, time-lapse photo available at the USGS website, as well as one of the important parameter from mesh output for forecasting iGEM flood water level. So we already have the setup for 1D device hydrodynamic model for this river from Dickey to Grand Falls. And we are using different types of hydraulic and river ice parameters and boundary conditions to simulate iGEM profiles during spring breakup and midwinter breakup as well. We have also different, like 2 different setups for upper reach and lower reach as well. So if you want, if necessary, then we can also do some kind of like separate simulations that could save us some computational time as well, if necessary. So we have done some calibration and validation for our model using past iGEM events along the river. And we have done some forecasting for spring 2020 as well. So we have generated like hundreds of iGEM water level profiles. Then from that ensemble iGEM water level profile, we can generate some probability distribution or 10th, 15th, or 19th percentiles of water level profile that occur due to iGEM formations along the river. As these rivers also prone to have midwinter freeze-up breakup that could form iGEM in different locations. So for that reason, we are also trying to model iGEM loss accumulation or progressions along the river that could help us to estimate one of the important boundary conditions for our modeling. Ice volume estimation, which is one of the crucial part of the model that we need to give the input. And eventually we will be, set up a stochastic framework and in Monte Carlo framework to generate similar kind of freeze-up profiles that could help us to estimate the probability distribution of ice volume, and then we can use that to simulate our forecasting midwinter iGEM formation and whatever as well. So these are kind of like brief work that we have been doing over the past years, and a similar kind of stuff we are also doing for different rivers such as Canada, Red River, Athabasca River, and some other rivers as well. And yeah, that's all for today. And thanks for giving me the opportunity. And I'm looking forward to the rest of the meeting. Thanks.
Great. Thanks very much, Apurva. That's great work. It was certainly a common theme, I think, from everybody that ice gems are pretty important in a lot of parts of the country, and it's interesting to see that there's actually more commonality than I would have actually imagined in terms of the approach, right? So I think to my colleagues in ECCC, there could be an opportunity here to do something nationally with the RCM and Sentinel data that we might want to consider down the road, or that you might want to consider down the road. And it looks like there's some sort of national consistent approach that's developing through a lot of hard work from, it looked like it was Alberta and Newfoundland, and with some of the work in New Brunswick, and I suspect Quebec, it looks like they have the same approach. So there could be some efforts here with the core modeling team to at least correlate the state of the art on this and see if there's a way to sort of bring things together, because the nice thing about CMC is they're a 24/7 operation, right? And so they can ingest data in real time and produce products and services. So I don't know if that's in the cards, Pierre and Vincent, but there might be something to consider down the road. Lizzie, Vincent.
I've also noted that down. So not only on the modeling side could we do something, but on the monitoring as well, right? Similar to what we've been doing for the open water extent. Yeah, we could do something for ice over rivers.
Yeah, so we'll jot that down and see if there's an uptake.
Yeah,
I think the provinces would like that too. So we'll see. Okay, thanks. And the last word goes to Chris. And I will give a bit of time to the Waterloo and McMaster folks as well if they want to say something afterwards too, because they're there. They're just so I'm not sure if James is there or Brian, but we can give them a few minutes too. So Chris, go ahead.
Awesome, thank you. Just trying to figure out how to share the screen.
The top right, it's a little arrow that goes up.
Oh yeah.
Here we go. That's good.
Can you see it?
Yeah.
I'll get rid of that then. Awesome. Great. So yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, so I'm Chris Marsh, postdoc with GWF with the Next Generation Modeling. Most of my scientific work is around the Canadian Hydrological Model, CHM. John gave a really nice presentation on that. So I'm just going to talk just really briefly about my dabbling in the forecasting area. And so this is a a system where we run CHM to do snow depth and SWE estimates, kind of for an area just west of Calgary in the Bow River. So this is using the HRDPS as well as the GTPS to do 2 and 6 day forecasts. And essentially it's just kind of a way of getting CHM running every day, working with these data and kind of building up the ability to run this over arbitrary domains in a somewhat quasi-operational way. So there's a lot of collaboration with Vincent Vianney with ECCC. And so in terms of like the data wrangling, and Snowcast is something that it's kind of been on my back burner for a while, but with the postdoc, I'm starting to put more and more effort into this. And so a lot of the next steps around this is improved visualization, improved data availability, working towards much larger spatial domains, and then enabling the blowing snow routines that John Pomeroy was talking about that I developed. And so being able to provide data for this region of SWE and snow depth estimates to begin with, that are generated from a high resolution physically based model. Because if you'll recall, CHM uses a series of unstructured triangular meshes. And so it allows us to have a lot of heterogeneity where the snow transport's really important, like around ridge lines, while still maintaining a quite reasonable runtime. So this is kind of an example on the right of what that data product currently looks like. It's not particularly flashy, but it's kind of an example of the work that I'm working towards and progressing for quasi-operational CHM runs. And then the next steps is then engaging with the broader community. That's kind of my presentation there.
Okay, great. Thanks, Chris. We're sort of running out of time, but I think I'll beg indulgence from Evan, and we'll maybe start a little bit later than them. But yeah, any quick questions for Chris? Okay, good. Thanks, Chris. That's great. So obviously,
thank you very much.
Major part of what we're doing here. So that's nice to hear about. I will give 2 seconds, and I apologize to my colleagues at Waterloo and McMaster, but anybody from Waterloo and McMaster just want to say a few words about their work and how it ties into the forecasting group. I know a lot of you are working with the ECCC as an example, so I don't know if Brian or I can't tell if Brian or James are on the call here, but
can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, Brian. Thank you.
I guess I'm on the call. I wasn't sure if I was going to say anything today, but if you want, we can talk. I can say that at Waterloo, we're doing some really cool stuff. I mean, Julie's been the architect behind the Casper system and getting all this forecast numerical weather data archived for everybody to use. So she's worked hard on that for the past few years. She's a research professor here at Waterloo. James and I have been developing Raven for a long time, and obviously we're working on that. We're looking at also doing large-scale routing experiments across the country and developing generalized lake and river routing networks to account for the thousands and thousands of lakes on the Canadian Shield and in Canadian environment. And so we're trying to develop tools that can assist with that and work and help do better forecasting at the local level. So yeah, I think those are the main things we've been doing lately. So that's about my real-time summary I can give. How's that?
Yeah, appreciate that, Brian. Sorry to put you on the spot, but I think
no, it's okay.
Glad you mentioned Casper, because that's an important platform for the forecasting team, right? So, and that's working all the time, and that's available. And that was a FloodNet thing that's still going, right? And
yeah,
available to everybody. So we should probably play that up a little bit more in our forecast team here as well.
Sure. And I see Vincent's hand up, and I can say we've been working with Vincent and Etienne with trying to evaluate vector-based routing for various networks, Lake of the Woods specifically, and see how that goes. So we've been working with his team on that.
Okay, just so everybody knows, I think the plenary group is coming over, but we can keep talking. Sorry, Evan, we're almost done.
I just wanted to mention that Casper is great, but Julie has to delete older data now because she's running out of disk space. And the Casper is done in 2 years.
Yeah.
So either we find long-term funding for Casper or we find another solution. 2 years is a very short time. Or no.
I agree, and maybe it's something this team, at least this group.
So at least everybody is aware that Julie has to delete data now on Casper, and we cannot move new data such as the latest PALDAS version to Casper because there's just no space. And it's just a question of adding disks.
Yeah, okay.
Something to keep in mind.
Yep. Yeah, we can bring that up with the larger group during the plenary as well, right? So, okay, so on that note, and I think the plenary people are joining us slowly here, so I think we're good. We've got some notes we've taken, and so we'll start the discussion at the plenary on some of the research efforts. And sorry, I cut into a bit of the plenary time, Evan, but we had some really good discussion.
Not a problem at all. We're going to just do a quick report back from the 4 breakout sessions as well as your group, if that's just start off.
Okay, do we want to give everybody a minute just to kind of resettle and
sure, let's do that. Yeah, we'll get started in a minute or so.
Okay. So just for folks, if you know you're not changing rooms, but you're virtually changing rooms, so you should all be coming into the plenary. So you should be slowly walking and chatting with everybody as you move into the plenary session with all of us, and we'll give it a minute.
Where's the coffee?
So you can grab a coffee or do whatever. So
it's the afternoon. They've already taken the coffee away, and there's only like 3 crumbs of cookie left. And someone's already complained that there's not enough healthy options. So there's also oranges, and we splurged for the mangoes.
Nice.
Thanks, Evan. It really makes it feel real.
You're very welcome, Isel. Thank you for
Can't go for a beer after.
Agreed. I have to admit, I apologize. The end of day pub sessions have been abysmal with this, and I'll definitely be bringing that to the group when we come back. We're just having a few more of the breakout sessions come back. As those who are coming back notice that they're on screen, just turn off your cameras as you see fit and mute yourselves. Although it is wonderful to see your smiling, happy faces. All right, as people are coming back, so in the terms of the agenda right now, we've got about just a few minutes for the breakout session report back. We're going to go to about 2 key bullets per group just to kind of start the conversation off. And then if we've got time, we might take all the facilitators and put them all in a breakout room for about 5 minutes to talk about notes, or we might just jump to the point where some of the notes that Al and the group have already prepared will kind of come up on screen and we can talk about it that way. But I'll defer to my co-chair on that one. Why don't we get started on the breakout session report back. Would breakout group 1 be available to provide just a quick idea of 2 major bullets that came up in your conversation?
Sure, I can speak to that. We had a very good conversation. I think I'll preface it by saying we could have benefited from more time because there was a lot of issues to discuss, but I hope that this is just kind of the first step in maybe these communication or meetings or these types of meetings continuing forward. In terms of 2 big takeaways, the first one, I'll focus on data and products. Part of the issue is obviously there's issues in some of the data like winter flows, but more so there's an issue of oversaturation of available options and not really having a lot of guidance how to combine that together. We saw examples from Quebec with how they were successful with doing that. How can others learn from that? And the, oh, I'm having a brain thought. But I think that was part of it. Oh, and the other part of it was the validity of it. So as much as we are issuing a lot of data products, SWE comes up a lot, for example, but it doesn't match when equivalent products are coming from other groups, and it doesn't match sometimes what we're seeing in observations or from our own regional surveys. How do we resolve that? Because what happens otherwise is some of these products are disseminated, they're more widely available, maybe they're easier to use because they're offered on a regional scale or a global or a national scale. And then people start using them, but maybe it's not actually providing the correct information, and so there's concerns about that. A second bullet, I'll focus on the community of practice. I think I already spoke a bit to it with saying that there's certainly a benefit of communication. How to do that, whether it's casual conversations, meetings, more formal meetings like this, or maybe sub-meetings, subcommittees focused on particular items, all of those things to take into consideration. And part of it is also knowing what's available and time. So these meetings and everything are great to present new products and everything that maybe we're not aware of, but how can we summarize that information? But even then, if it's summarized, jurisdictions only have limited capacity and time to actually delve into the details. And so there's still a bit of a disconnect, and maybe to manage that communication of information more effectively. And then the final takeaway for that would be to learn from example or existing committees. I don't think with something like community practice, we necessarily have to reinvent the wheel. There's certainly a lot of already existing committees and communities that exist who are doing things quite well, even within a specific jurisdiction. So to learn from what's already going on and apply what's kind of the best, we should move it forward.
Excellent, thank you, Dan. That's a great report back, and some of the same things came up in the group 3 I had. I know group 2 just came back. I might give Jacob a couple minutes to just get his feet under himself, and I can provide an update for group 3, and then I'll pass on to Jacob to do group 2, unless Jacob, you'd like to go now.
Just getting back into the main session here now.
I'll do one, then I'll pass it over to you, and then to wrap it up for group 4 will be Francois Nzoku, and then Al, if you've got one for the bigger group, we'll do that. So for group 3, echoing Dan's comments, it was a very good conversation. Everyone's very keen and interested in this community of practice and how to, again, the not reinvent the wheel theme came up for the umpteenth time. Specific conversations about how we share information and being the provincial and territorial partners being aware of what's available and how ECCC could potentially improve upon how we bring our products to market, for lack of a better term. There was a conversation around even a wiki would be very helpful in terms of explaining how things are and how they're accessible and what can be used for what. A lot of feedback about people enjoying yesterday's yesterday afternoon's presentations from ECCC. And there are many, many people coming in here from group 4, which is excellent. So as we continue moving forward, the other key one would be the idea of resourcing and kind of the obvious differences in capacity across the country between certain jurisdictions, being able to leverage the work that's already been done by someone who's already done it, as well as what makes sense in terms of if we're going to have a community of practice, well, someone whose group is a bit smaller may not have the bandwidth or capacity to take on another community of practice or what have you, and perhaps we can use existing structures. The National Administrators Table was suggested, or maybe a subcommittee under that. We also talked about how there's a potential for a flood forecasting, flood mapping community of practice, and whether or not there's an opportunity to how separate we keep them or not. So those were the big 2 takeaways for us in terms of just lots of really interesting products and services available and how that all fits into supporting the province and territories in the development and issuance of their forecasts, as well as how we leverage learnings or lessons that other groups have already achieved nationally. Those are the big 2, I would say, from group 3, and group 3 obviously can put in the chat if I've missed one, please do. I know Francois Nzoku, you're just coming back from yours. I'll pass it over to Jacob to provide quick 2 points.
Yeah, thanks. Apologies we had a great discussion. got back a little bit late, so we missed Dan's summary, but I'm looking forward to hearing what was discussed in those groups as well. So I think the 2 points we kind of settled on for our group, we started talking about key problems, barriers, so the main challenges, I guess, that a number of jurisdictions in our group at least were facing, and I think there were 2 identified. The main one that we discussed most was the challenges of both forecasting snow melt and winter processes. So winter, both snow melt and also ice conditions, ice jamming, even just not just even the necessarily forecasting ice jamming, but the communicating of changing water levels, changing flows during the winter when ice conditions are affecting, say, rating curves, for example, and how to bring that into a forecasting system, but also how to kind of communicate that the uncertainty or the complications that ice conditions can cause when data gets put out in front of the public and that kind of thing, right? So that was one part of that more technical discussion. The other part was the more localized, smaller basin, flashy basin flooding that occurs during heavy storms in summer. It's kind of the opposite of the winter side of things. That being a big challenge, this is a challenge that's faced by forecasting agencies across the world. But that challenge being how to capture that uncertainty, better capture that uncertainty in the summer months when those more localized storms can really make or break your forecast. So that was some of the technical discussion, though I think that when I really zoned in on at the very end was really this, again, strong support for the community of practice idea, sharing of information. We heard like talks about let's do these meetings way more often, like every 3 months, every 6 months. Let's do a more focused meeting with also at different levels. So this has been a very broad topic. Let's cover everything. But we also had maybe a suggestion to do something more technically focused on certain topics. So bring some of the technical people together across jurisdictions to really zero in on something specific. We also, we like the idea of a wiki or additional documentation. There was concern raised that we get the showcase and we see a lot of great products and great tools, but then we all head back and where do we go to learn more about them? Where do we go to actually find out how to implement them, bring them into our systems, actually put them to work for us, right? So again, I think really strong support for the broader idea of community of practice with a lot of ways to get there, whether it's additional meetings, better documentation, bilateral meetings or whatever, right? So it's a very good discussion. Anybody, I'm not sure if anybody has anything to add from our group. If you do, please add it to the chat and go from there.
Excellent, thank you, Jacob. Yeah, same themes came up in group 3. That's excellent, and I would say all of the above were a lot of good and interesting things to do. All right, group 4, Francois, are you available to provide an update for your group, or did someone else get elected?
Okay, yes, I'm available to do that. So we also had a very interesting discussion in our breakout session, and I think the 2 top topics that we decided to report on were one related to data and the other one related to developing lines of communication to kind of help the different territorial partners do a better job in forecasting. So, regarding to data, came up more often that people wanted more and better data. The issue of sparse data or no data in some jurisdictions also came up, and people also reported sometimes the lack of reliability when with some data. So just knowing what data is available and where was also identified as something that could be helpful, because like just the example of data mart, where people reported that there was a lot of data, but just sometimes even just navigating to find what you need sometimes might be challenging. And also in that the sense of the accuracy or the score of the data of some data that people have out, we're having so also people were interested to know maybe the accuracy of some of those data. And the example of that could be like the result of some of the forecasting models, or maybe the kappa product and so on. So I think that's a lot was said about the data. The second point that we also had was developing line of communication. It was noticed that the group is large, and the expertise or the level of forecasting knowledge or resources is not the same across the country. So it's difficult to have one answer for everybody. So it was mentioned that developing line of communication where jurisdictions could communicate to help each other already could be something that could be helpful. And also, if we even thinking about the community of practice, working in subgroups could also be helpful in that sense, because the needs are not the same across the country. Some group might just be interested in things like just a subgroup on ice jar, and other might be interested in something else. So I think I might be missing something, but please, if I've missed anything important, please just feel free to raise it.
Thank you, Francois. That was excellent. Yes, the data item did come up in my group as well, and certainly the difference in terms of solutions and capacity and resourcing nationally is a common theme that I also have noticed certainly yesterday and in the breakout session. So that's excellent in terms of it being brought up and something that we need to keep in mind. And I'm hearing loud and clear from everyone that this definite desire for more conversations in this. I mean, 40 minutes seems like a long time if you are driving across the prairies, as it were. But if you're, not that it's not beautiful, but it can be more challenging when you're trying to really get into something and talk more. So I'm sure these breakout sessions could have lasted an hour or two. However, we will have more, trust me. At that point, pass it over to Al, just if you want to provide a quick couple points from your session.
Yeah. So yeah, we had a great discussion. I mean, we had some of the core GWF core people sort of present what they're working on with respect to forecasting, and set a bit of context with respect to sort of the Canadian realities of forecasting. And so we had some great discussions about a few items here and where we might want to go with respect to research programs and how we bring things together. So just a couple of points, and I'll ask other colleagues to jump in if they'd like. So the one thing for sure that came up is predictability, and looking at predictability and talking about seasonal forecasts based on Louise's work and some of the discussions. And one of the questions that came up actually was, is this the right group? You know, are folks at the provincial and territorial level are really interested in seasonal forecasts, right? Or is it more the reservoir operators? Are they in the same teams? You know, that's something I think we should consider as a community of practice on how we move that forward, because the seasonal forecasts are getting better and things are changing, right? And so, you know, how do we articulate needs for seasonal forecasting? You know, that kind of thing. So that was, I don't know if that's a research gap per se, but we are doing research on seasonal forecasting, and I think to tie it with the operational agencies might be something we want to think about. We talked a little bit, but not much, about benchmarking sites in Canada, and Brian Tolson actually mentioned CASPAR, which was a real success story for FloodNet. and it's got a limited shelf life as a platform. Is this something that, from a research perspective, we want to maintain in Canada? How do we maintain it? For those of you who don't know, CASPAR was developed under FloodNet as a way to store forecast information across the country, right? And so the forecast, the precipitation forecast, or the numerical weather forecast coming out of ECC gets stored on the CASPAR site and are available for experiments and running different things. And so you know, it's been a great resource for the research community. It could be of value to the more operational folks too, right? But we don't know where to take it next. So that's just a flag, I think, Evan, for the research team and others to think about. One of the other things that came up is ice jam forecasts. So that's actually been a lot more common theme than I originally anticipated when we put this together, Evan. And it seems like there is a good way forward. There's a lot of collaboration on that front. I think other people have said that as well. And so, you know, we need to think from a research perspective. Maybe there's some elements in there that we need to focus on. And also, you know, thinking about, is there a national role for 24/7 support on things like RCM and interpreting ice in rivers, you know, that kind of thing. Certainly there's Secor and others do it, right? So maybe that's the best solution, we don't know, but is that something that we should look at from a research perspective and an operations perspective? And then my one note, I guess, and this is, you know, talking, you know, after Dave and Martin and Vincent and a bunch of people sort of started talking about, and I just put uncertainty. And so, you know, the whole discussion about assimilation of state variables, particularly snow, and that's a massive research effort. How do we deal with remote sensing products versus in situ products, and sort of bring that together in a way to assimilate it into the systems, right? So there's a lot of discussions about that and how we pull that together. And then there's some interesting points that were brought up both by Martin and Vincent around the idea of when you're sort of doing a retrospective analysis on a forecast, you have perfect stream flow, and Vincent brought this up. You have perfect stream flow, you have quality assured data, you know, everything, right? But then when you're actually doing a forecast in the real world, none of that's assured, right? And things break and fall apart, and you're not quite sure, you know, what the data means, right? And so how do we sort of bring that real life perspective into the forecasting realm in terms of a research effort, right? And so Martin brought up the system that was developed at NCAR as a way to maybe look at that, right, and sort of do some simulations, I guess, if you like, on how that works. So that was brought up. And then a couple of issues around uncertainty and flow estimates were brought up as well. And then last thing is, I think this was common, is winter flow measurements and estimations. We don't really know what's going on in the winter in a lot of ways. And so, you know, how do we tie that in better and into our analysis? And there's a bit of a research gap there as well. So I don't know if anything, Martin or others, do you have something to add to what I just said? Okay, so that's good.
Sorry, Al. No, I thought that captured it really, really well. And I've really enjoyed the past few days seeing the juxtaposition of what the provinces and territories are doing, and then what's going on in Environment Canada and the research communities. I can see a lot of overlap and some good synergies there. So it's really, really nice to see.
Great. Okay, that's it, Evan. Thank you.
Thanks, Al. Yeah, that's really interesting to hear. And I do think those seasonal forecasts, there's an interesting place for those in terms of, speaking from experience, facetiously, it's not like anyone's ever received a briefing note request from higher up the chain in, you know, January 3rd saying, is it going to flood this year? You know, let me know. You have a week. That seasonal component of even providing an indication of what things are going to look like and where is an expectation, and being able to provide even a little bit of feedback and intelligence on that is of importance. So yeah, that's really good. And other points you raised, excellent. So at this point, a couple paths forward. We can take the facilitators and put them in a breakout session just to discuss the upcoming plenary, or we can forge on ahead with the kind of key points we've already got summarized and do that. What do you think, Al?
I'm thinking if folks want to take a 5-minute coffee break, we'll just make sure that we're all on the same page. We'll come back for a plenary, probably about half an hour, I guess, if people are getting worn out, and then we'll close it off. So if everybody's comfortable with that, we'll take 5 or maybe 10. Will be reasonable here. So 2:30 Eastern, I guess. People can come back, and we'll be done by 3. The organizing committee will just sort of gather our notes and be ready for a plenary discussion to talk about next steps and summarize what we've kind of learned over the 3 days. So if that's okay with everybody, and Evan, I think we can do that. So yeah, so 2:30 Eastern time, please get back on. I'd say leave your computer going, and or the team's going, and we'll just break out into a little group and get back to you at 2:30. Is that good?
Sounds good.
Okay, I think we're all back, so hopefully people got a little bit of a break. Go through sort of what the common elements that we found through the 3 days are, maybe where some of the research gaps are would be slide number 2, and then sort of what some of the next steps in moving forward are, and that should wrap us up, hopefully in about 20 minutes, and then we'll say our goodbyes and all that stuff. So, puis encore, si vous avez des questions en français, pas de problème, on peut parler en français aussi. There's enough people here that can translate. So, let's start. So, I guess some of what we noted, I guess from day 1, it was really interesting to have some of the folks there from ECMWF and certainly from NOAA. And of course, there's a transboundary element there that was actually important to discuss, right? So forecasting, both seasonal and subseasonal is truly a global effort. We're seeing that everywhere, and it'll be interesting, right? It'll be interesting to see where that all lands over the next 10 years. I don't know if I should tell this story, Evan, but I always remember when the Calgary flood, when I can't remember who it was, but a forecaster from Italy or something said, "Oh, we nailed that forecast," and on the 2013 Calgary flood, right? And of course, they don't tell you how many times they missed the forecast, but they tell you about the one they got, right? And that makes the news. And then all I remember, Evan, at that time was I felt really sorry for you as the forecaster for Alberta, because all you're doing is fighting fires from your bosses about, well, how come this guy from Italy got the forecast and we were off by 2 inches or blah blah blah, right? So it is a global effort. We're gonna have to deal with it, and I know all the flood agencies in Canada have to deal with it, and so it's probably better to join them, I think, in a way, and try to figure out how to cooperate. So that's one sort of message I think that came out. Canada has unique challenges with transboundary rivers. I think that's clear, and we have good cooperation with the USA. We can maybe do better on that front, and there's lots of places perhaps where we can coordinate those efforts through NOAA and ECCC with the provinces and territories. So that's something to consider. It was clear from the meeting there were a wide variety of approaches. That's not a criticism, that's just a reality. Everybody's dealing with different realities in terms of their hydrological regimes, in terms of their data, in terms of the number of people they have, in terms of technology. So there's no surprises there. We learned that, we've known that for many years. It's encouraging to see, and I think this is fair, that many jurisdictions are using the deterministic numerical forecasts coming out of ECCC for their operational work. Some are using US or other forecasts as well, which is interesting. There seems to be some uptake on the ensemble weather forecast coming from ECCC, so that was a bit of a common theme. Hopefully that we picked up on that properly. And it looks like there's some really interesting collaboration going on with river ice information and dealing with river ice jams and some common platforms. We saw there was a lot of work being done with Quebec and Alberta as an example, which is great to see. And I think this community practice kind of lends itself to that kind of thing, which is great. And of course, people reach out on their own as well. I did note that there was a lot of interest in the radar constellation mission and maybe Sentinel information coming out of Europe. And so, maybe this group might want to consider a subgroup on normalizing all of this. I'm not sure, right? There's possibilities maybe within our CAN and ECCC to do that. So that might be something we want to explore, but certainly from a common perspective, it seemed like there was a lot of people on the same page with respect to ice jam floods. I think there were some common approaches around SWE and initial conditions in the model, but not entirely consistent. It wasn't clear to me, are people actually using the CalDAS products? Are they readily available? Do they know they exist? Have they evaluated them? That kind of thing. It was nice to hear Vincent Viennet talk about CMC, I guess, pulling together the data across Canada. I know Ross Brown used to do that on a kind of a 5-year basis to develop a snow database for Canada. That's certainly something I think that's missing from a national perspective, and maybe that's something we want to look at, both real-time and archive perspective. It was increasingly clear to me that the real-time flow information out of the NHS is critical. Some issues around uncertainty in the data, especially in the winter. But there's probably some room for improvement and discussion around that. And what caught me was there's a lot of common models actually being used amongst the various agencies. Things like HEC-RAS, Raven came up a few times, and others, right? So there's some commonality there that maybe makes sense. And of course, a lot of people are ingesting the SBS system work. So these are all sort of things that I noted, and others in our group noted with respect to sort of the coordinating group here. So is there anything else we need to add to this slide? Because this will go into our kind of final report here on what we're doing. So I would just ask for a show of hands. Is there something critical that's missing or something people feel need to be added here? Okay, I see one hand. I can't tell who it is. So Martin, I think it's you.
Yes, this is really minor, Al. I think this is a really good summary. And where you say real-time flow information, I think adding meteorological information there is important as well.
Yeah, good. Thanks. It's a good catch, Martin. Appreciate that.
Khaled?
Yeah, so I am also interested to see that how we can improve the Kappa product, because especially in Alberta, the Kappa is not performing well. So maybe we can ingest more stations to improve the Kappa product. So I'm looking forward for that.
Okay. Yeah. So actually, we should put in there in terms of maybe Khaled will leave that for some of the moving forward discussions because that's good. But I think for the summary, I think it's fair to say that pretty much everybody uses Kappa now, right? I don't want to say everybody absolutely does, but I think it's so we should maybe add Pravin that Kappa as a product is used by most jurisdictions or something to that effect, right? So that and industry too, right? I mean, we don't talk about industry very much, but the hydro companies also use it. Actually, it's Manitoba Hydro that actually paid for the development of Kappa 15 years ago, right? So let's make sure that that's noted. So, and I agree. We'll put that in the moving forward discussions about. And I suspect Vincent and both Vincent and Pierre that you'd be interested in feedback on Kappa from the provinces and territories about where it's not performing, and I always wonder if maybe that can inform some addition of stations in areas where it's really poor, something like that, right? Does that make sense?
Absolutely, that makes sense.
Okay, so we'll put that in the next summary. Okay, so anything else from folks about the sort of common messages here? Dave?
Yeah, you can obviously take my comment with a grain of salt, given as I do still work for Alteris, but I think I would be amiss in not saying that if you look at the infrastructure that extends beyond what Environment Canada is doing, very commonly in both provinces and territories, and also in hydropower industry, it's a very common infrastructure that people are using in order to extend that. And often the barrier point between provinces and territories that can access forecasting systems and those that can't is the extension of that infrastructure. So I think it's worthwhile to include that there is a common movement and adoption of Delft in Canada, and supporting that may help a community of practice. But as I say, with a grain of salt, that's my input.
Yeah, that's fair. So I think if we articulate, Krabin, that common data management platforms are being used. I don't think we want to put any names there, but there is a move towards common data management platforms in Canada. I think that sort of makes sense, and we can be agnostic on the actual type. Is that okay, Dave?
That captures it. Thanks.
Great. Okay, Khaled, you still have your hand up. Do you have another question, or is it just a legacy hand? Okay, thank you. Okay, so I think that summarizes kind of what we have in common here, watching the time. We'll go to the next slide here with respect to some of the research gaps, and I know I missed quite a few. So I'll open up the floor to folks who want to be a little more specific about some of the research gaps here. So I think one of the things that came up was obviously the seasonal forecast. I mentioned this earlier. The idea of benchmarking. What do we do with CASPAR? I don't know if that's a research gap. That's more of just a gap in general. On the ice jam side, it seems like there's sort of a common theme going here with, but are there any research elements that we want to focus on with respect to that? And there looks like remote sensing products is a key part of the development here. And then I don't know if this makes sense, but uncertainty is what I put down there. There's a lot of discussion around that. And then some talk about winter flow measurements and estimations. And I guess we could put a caveat that the real-time estimation of that is critical, and it's not exactly clear how you do that actually. And then the whole idea of uncertainty and flow estimates, but there's probably, which is a little bit separate from maybe some of the atmospheric variables that we looked at in terms of both the state variables and the forcing variables. So that's where we came up with sort of some thoughts on the research side. So I'll open the floor up to others who maybe want to add. So Jennifer, I noticed your hand's up, so please.
The only thing I would add is I still feel like I'm really unsure how to properly provide feedback to products that aren't working for us. And can we align goals? I know that most researchers would like to have papers, so maybe it would make sense to collaborate on papers that would evaluate some of the products based on a forecasting context or a more local context. So I'm still unsure. Like, to me, that's a gap in research, is how to put those two things together.
Yeah, no, I think that's an excellent point. Any other comments on that? I get where you're coming from. So, Pravin, we should probably write something down about, validation of products and services coming out of the system. Is there room for that, and maybe some thoughts about research on how provinces and territories can take advantage of some of these products and services as well. Like when I think about ensemble forecasts coming out of the NWP, I would imagine that not all the provinces and territories are set up for that. They maybe don't know how to interpret some of that, and I know from experience that the provinces and territories are always spending half their time dealing with, you know, the deputy minister screaming at them because, you know, somebody got flooded out, right? Or there's, you know, where do I need to buy sandbags, you know, that kind of detail, right? And so you don't have a lot of time to sit back and think about ensemble forecasts, right? So I think maybe there's some discussion around an applications gap or whatever, development gap that needs to be somehow rectified. Does that make sense to folks? Sorry, I'm putting words in your mouth there, Jennifer, but.
Yeah, and maybe the initiative could come, I agree about the like deputy minister down your back. So maybe the initiative could come from the researchers to provide a framework for the validation.
Yeah, so why don't we write it like that, like saying, so maybe there's room for the research community to develop a framework for evaluation and validation of some of the numerical weather products and how they can improve the forecast. I mean, there's a lot of talk about skill, right, and how we do that. Maybe that comes through some benchmarking work as well, right? So that's a good point. Dave Bird?
Yeah, thanks, Al. Maybe two things that come to mind for me on the research gaps, Al, and maybe thanks to Jennifer for triggering this, but maybe on the opposite side, even influencing the research that's being done, and understanding that structure. We don't know if FloodNet, for example, is continuing, and so from my perspective, operationally, what are the sources of research? Are we focused here on EC cubed? Are we looking at an entire academic research community? That's what kind of I thought FloodNet was supposed to try and get at. I don't know how successful that was, but I know you've tried to influence that work as well, Al, to your credit. But even having the ability to understand what research might be coming and how to influence the topics, and trying to get that, trying to figure out ways and a framework to bridge that gap between the research and the operations side. Obviously, there's value in both, but needing to know, trying to figure out where we need to know improvements or targeting those and being able to influence those research topics might be a good one to add to.
Yeah, that's a great idea, Dave. Appreciate that. And it's actually, I mean, I'll see other comments, but it's actually a good segue into the last slide, because we do talk about, you know, how do we move things forward in Canada with respect to the water agency, right? So maybe there's a way forward there, right, where we have enough people that we could form some kind of an alliance between the research community and the water resources community and the you know, provincial and territorial and also federal, right, to see how we can maybe move those things forward. There used to be, I don't think John's Pomeroy's on, but we used to have way back the Committee on Hydrology, right? That was federal, provincial, academic committee that used to actually set research priorities for hydrology in Canada, right? The Associate Committee on Hydrology was, I think it was disbanded in 96 or 95. I still have the gavel. There was a gavel that came with that Associate Committee on Hydrology. So it was an official thing, and I've got the gavel. But yeah, we could maybe through the agency propose something like that, right? Where because my personal view is certainly there's a development gap in this country, and you know, we don't have the infrastructure to actually move things into operations very well, right? And so there could be there could be something there for sure. So I think that's what you're getting at, right, Dave?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, any other points people want to bring up quickly on the research gap side? Okay. I see. Martin again. Sorry, Martin, do you want to go? You're on mute, Martin, if you're talking.
Yeah, sorry about that. I was just wondering the extent to which the provinces and territories will be moving more into environmental prediction systems, predicting things beyond flow, and if that should be listed as a research gap as well. I know there's a lot of push for that in the US.
That's a good point. Any takers on the provincial territorial side? I would imagine, Khaled, you've got some opinions there with the oil sands work, but
yeah, so I think like they summarize the last point. Most of the time what is happening is is following the top-down approach, but especially if we want to get benefit, it's better to have a bottom-up approach so that the researchers know what are needs and then they formulate research around that. I think that's the best option. Yeah,
there's a whole knowledge mobilization effort here that has to happen, right? And it has to happen in two directions. So I completely agree with that analysis, Khaled. Thank you. So on Martin's question, then, is there interest from this group or is it another group in terms of maybe short-term predictability of or even longer-term seasonal predictability around things like non-point pollution sources, nutrients, phosphorus, other things? Is that something we should include here? Is that in the bailiwick of some of you or not? Or any strong opinions?
Yeah, I know from the BC perspective, I think that we're always trying to manage the kind of range of things we get involved in. So I think we always get concerned about creeping into or getting involved in things that are not part of the core work. And it's certainly something that in our operations, is not something really being asked of us.
Okay. I mean, it could be another group as well, right? And that's fair. So I think, Martin, what we can do is put it as a research gap, and a bit like the seasonal side, right? I mean, not everybody at this table is going to be interested in the seasonal forecasts. We could think about that from a research perspective and see how we reach out to maybe different subgroups in the provinces and territories around those issues. Okay.
Yep, sounds good. Thanks.
Okay, so last call on research gaps.
We've got one more hand raised if you want to ask your question, or is it a relic hand as has been suggested?
No, I think it's Micha from the Netherlands. So
there you go.
Bit further out. Great to see you all and nice to join the meeting. Yeah, the research gap I thought indeed just to bring up, which it kind of alludes to the discussion that's just being held, because in the interesting presentations from the provinces, there was a lot about communication and dissemination, and indeed I was thinking, that might be a research gap at two levels, perhaps. One out to the to the end users, indeed, and I think Louise also brought up the point in her presentation on what is the actual value of forecasts, because we talk about skill throughout these presentations, but very little about actual value to end users. And so I think there's communication and dissemination maybe at two levels, one to the end users, but also between ECCC and the provinces, because there's, I think you brought it up, Evan, this question of contextualization, and which is a bidirectional question to my mind. So, there's a question that goes from the provinces to ECC as well as the other way around, and sort of, enriching that discussion can, I think, take a whole different perspective on how some of these continental models are actually made, as well as the local models. So I thought I'd add that into the mix.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Mika. That's a great thing to add. Prabin can add that. We did discuss in my days at ECCC that it'd be nice if we could sort of do that through a platform like Fuse, right, where feedback to the federal side could be done through some kind of a modeling system at the end of the day, right? And I think that's still something we should look into, right? So yeah, that's a great point, and I think that's really important. And then the pointy end of the stick is really, getting somebody to clean out their basement because it's going to flood, right?
Yeah.
And that's absolutely critical. And how do you convey that information in a real sense, right? So
and I think there's there's quite a lot of interesting work on climate services. Especially quite a lot of research in Europe happening in that direction. So we kind of figured out. I'm not saying we've solved it, but figured out how to run a forecast. But now, okay, what the hell do we do with it? So that's like the next step down the line.
Yeah, agreed.
All right.
So, Pravin, are you sort of able to jot something down on that front? I'm not seeing anything, but.
No, I was waiting for you to reframe the point.
Okay, so I think what we could, I think there's two points here, right? One is research on framing services to the public, right? That are meaningful and I don't know, Misha, do you have a better wording there?
Yeah, I think to the public on the one hand, because I see two interfaces here, one between, let's say, the provinces and the public, and one between ECCC and the provinces and territories in a sense. So there's sort of two sets of bidirectional communication. And so is that a me? Yeah. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, so I agree with you. So let's put a second bullet as and this kind of goes to Khaled's point about top down versus bottom up in a way, right? So research on facilitating two-way communications between sort of national entities and local forecasting groups or something like that, I think is what we're getting at, right? Yeah, perfect.
Thanks.
Hey, thanks for those insights. That's great. You've seen a lot of this around the world, so it's appreciated. Okay, let's move to the third item here, which is sort of moving forward. So I think in general we saw the real value for this group. I'm assuming that everybody's on side there, and this forum appears to be fostering collaboration, but there's already some in place. So there's existing collaborations that will probably grow out of this because people are realizing, oh, there's a couple of folks collaborating. Maybe I want to be part of that team, which is fair. How we move that forward, I'm not exactly sure, but it took us 2 years to organize this meeting. COVID didn't help, mind you, but I think it makes sense to have this as an annual thing for sure. And we should think about, I think it makes sense to think about a structure, much like we have with the National Administrators Table in the federal government with all the provinces. You might want to have a 6-month catch-up with folks, not necessarily a meeting like this, but just a discussion between key individuals on a 6-month basis, and try to work some of these details out. So, if folks are comfortable with that, Evan and I can come up with the team, come up with some suggestions about how to maybe formalize this a bit more. If there's interest, right? If there's not, then that's fair, but I think there is. And then I think it'd be nice to frame this in terms of the Canada Water Agency, right? So I mean, we're still not sure where this agency discussion is going. COVID took over everything in government, right? So that was a promise from the Prime Minister's office. There have been some announcements, but they're still looking for guidance on this, right? So it seems to me that this community of practice element, could be a real win with respect to the water agency, right? I mean, it could be a sort of a key component where we bring, the research and the operations and the national forecasting group together, right, in something that's meaningful and that moves things forward, right, and sort of takes advantage of economies of scale and other things. So, I mean, we can propose that this group take a position on that or not. You might, I mean, it's hard when you're a political group, I mean, or work for a political master to take positions on certain things, but I'll open the floor for discussions around that. I mean, Sean earlier said, she thinks it makes sense. Is there any strong feeling one way or the other about the agency and how this could feed into whatever that agency looks like, or do we want to try to try to even influence the formation of that agency, right? Which is possible, right? So, any thoughts there? I see a couple of hands.
I think this group is working well like it is right now. We have a good momentum. We have good ideas. We are at the beginning of our thinking. I feel that this is very, the geometry of the group will be very diverse because there is interests that are different from province and territories, and we should try to build on this and avoid having some political things in the middle of it. So if we take a position on it, it may make some provinces, and I will mention Quebec, less comfortable with what we're doing now. And I think we should focus on this, on the content and what we want to do, share, making science, and let those kind of discussion at another level, and don't take a specific position on it. That's my point.
No, that's a valid concern. Anybody else want to mention that? I think that's fair. You know, we don't have to have a position. We can just, if it becomes part of an agency discussion, that's fine. That's organic and that works, and I'm sure it could work. But we'll see. Other opinions there. Sean, I saw you, and then Kurt.
While I don't disagree with Richard's comment, I think there's a lot of value there. I am not sure how we define this group. We've had upwards of 180 people on over the past 3 days, which is fabulous. But how does that's not a working size, obviously. So somewhere you have to start to draw lines. While I do certainly hear Richard's point.
Yeah, that's fair, right? I mean, this was a workshop and a conference, I guess. I mean, it all came together, but I think the working group would be something like the National Administrators Table. You know, that's led through ECCC, right? That would be similar on the forecasting side, right? Is kind of, I think, what Evan's looking at for, right, you know, with maybe a series of bilateral points between, or bilateral agreements between the provinces and the federal government, right? But in a national context, just like the hydrometric program, with a lot of flexibility. Okay, Kurt.
Yeah, we're still, I would say, looking at the concept of the Canada Water Agency, and I think this group or ways for people to feed up to some sort of like smaller forum, like you're saying, is certainly very beneficial. As we went through and kind of looked through all the detailed questions related to Canada Water Agency, what I noticed that our biggest recommendations were things that we've been talking about here. Maybe that's just, you know, our interests, but it is more things like more monitoring, more access to data, building the foundation, getting those numerical products out there. And so I guess the question is, what actually is that role of that Canada agency or the potential Canada Water Agency? Because some of it feels like it just might be more redundancy. And so it's difficult to see how that fits in when it's much easier to be able to come and talk in this smaller forum and talk to the people who are, you know, actually implementing the work.
Yeah, I mean, I think if folks feel like, you know, look, given my experience in government, right, if you feel that you don't want it to be a bureaucratic nightmare, then you know, you really might want to consider a position, right, in terms of what you want it to be. And so if it is basically a community of practice at the end of the day, you know, and there's different communities of practices, maybe a community of practice on drinking water quality or whatever, right? There's lots of water issues, right? Then you know, that's one way to formulate this thing, right? There's the old Associate Committee on Hydrology that I mentioned, you know, that actually has some strategic funding initiatives that move things forward, right? You know, this group could have a say in some of that, right? So there's things to think about, Kurt, in terms of how it could work. It doesn't necessarily have to be a top-down organization, right? It could be, you know, more like, I don't know, the Canada Health Agency, right? I mean, we're seeing in that case that you know, the provinces still deal with the health realities, right? But the Canada Health Agency appears to me to be more of a national coordination group, right? And so there might be some value in that, right? So. Okay, so it sounds like, you know, maybe this group doesn't take a strong position, but, you know, it's good that people are talking about it, right? And I'm sure individual provinces and other stakeholders will want to bring their own thoughts to the table. I don't think that the agencies should supersede this group at the end of the day, would be my view. You know, we can make sure that this group maintains its presence, I guess, however that works, right? So let's, if we can, we'll leave it there for now. I think a common theme was the snow theme, cryospheric variables in general, including things like river ice. I was pleased to hear Vincent Vianney say that they're collating data across Canada, but it is rather difficult, I think, to be systematic about snow information across Canada. I think I mentioned earlier, you know, we used to have a glacier mass balance program. I think we're now down to 2 glaciers in Canada that we actually take the mass balance measurements for, right? And it doesn't get a lot of traction, I know from my experience at the federal level, right? It doesn't get a lot of traction. You know, it's expensive to measure snow. Nobody wants to do it, except the agencies that have to, right? So that's typically the hydro groups, or for a transboundary requirement, or if you're a flood forecasting agency and you know, it's absolutely critical to what you're doing, right? And so it seems to me moving forward, there's maybe some thought we can have about how we want to bring the cryosphere closer to hydrology and forecasting down the road, and that seemed to be a common theme. I'm not sure how that would work, but it seems to me that we're all kind of in that same position, that we need to give some thought about how to deal with the cryosphere with respect to our forecasting requirements and with respect to our water management requirements across the country. So is that a fair statement to say? Then we can maybe put some thoughts about how that works. Sheila?
Yeah, thanks, Al. I think just from our group discussion that we had this afternoon, snow and ice are definitely factors that came up. And then the other kind of recurring, I guess, problematic area was related to smaller catchments, where sometimes you get a forecast and then you don't know if it's going to hit this catchment or another one, might not have as many gauges if available, if at all. So the smaller catchments, and also linked to kind of late summer, early fall storms that can come in with very heavy rainfall events. I think were kind of the two main problematic topics that came out, at least from our group.
Okay, thanks for that, Sheila. We'll make sure we include that in there, and we'll write up something on along those lines and see what the uptake is from folks. So. Okay, great. Any other comments on that? Okay, I think the other bullet was supposed to be a sub-bullet actually of the snow depth, snow water equivalent stuff. So right now, there appears to be no really systematic approach to bringing the data together, except maybe at CMC. So maybe that's something we recommend as a kind of a national way of bringing data together. I know the hydro companies collects them as well. There's things like gamma surveys in Saskatchewan that NOAA does on the transboundary basins, right? You know, those kinds of things. Some of that may be ingested into the NWP CalDAS system, some of it not. So maybe one thing we should do is really, and I think CMC has done a lot of this work already, is really take a look at how that all works and maybe make some recommendations to tie it together a little bit better, right? So that it gets a priority within, you know, as something we need to do, right? And I think one of the issues I see is you know, we tend to look at networks of opportunity, right, as opposed to network design, and so we you know, we often say, oh well, you know, where are the stations, and we'll take what we can get, as opposed to say, well, maybe we should have a station here because it's absolutely critical to know the snowpack at these few points, so that we can interpolate or run an analysis system to figure out what the snowpack actually looks like at the broader scale. So there's probably some thinking around that. So I noticed a hand up. I'm not sure who it is, but whoever it is can speak up.
Yeah, that's me, Vincent Vionnet, you were mentioning the snow data. I just want to add something. I think it's very important to make the distinction between like keeping like an historical record of snow data that we will update on a, let's say, on a yearly basis, and then do access to near real-time snow data that we can use for data assimilation, like for the product that are beneficial for day-to-day operational hydrological forecasting. To my point of view, it's a key challenge, like to be able, so far at ECCC, we are not able to get access to the manual snow survey data that are collected across the provinces, because it's a challenge to get them in a good timing, in a timing which is suitable for the data assimilation needs. So I think it's really important to keep in mind that there are two needs. As important, I would say, like keeping the historical record for all the past study, for all historical studies, and then the near real-time access. And I think we need to make progress on both sides. Thanks.
Okay, so we'll note those two things. So Pravin, I think you can add that we should really look at it from, and I think everybody's going to agree that look at it from a real or near real-time perspective, and from an archive perspective, and see how we can maybe do a better job across the country in bringing those data together. And I think there's a net benefit, right, to everybody if we do that. So great. I'll see this now. Okay, so last 2 points quickly. So I think this goes back to Mika's point earlier about community feedback. So when I say community, I mean this community on ACC products and services being developed. So I don't know if there's a mechanism at this point. So I'll ask the provinces and territories if they feel like they could reach up to ECCC and say, hey, we're really struggling with understanding this, or what, the last precipitation forecast we got from you guys was really off, or I don't know, whatever it is, or that was a great forecast, positive. There's no real mechanism, as far as I know, to sort of deal from a community perspective. So is that a fair statement? And I'd ask the provinces to maybe speak up.
Sean, I'll put my 2 cents in. A direct mechanism would be massively helpful, particularly with on the ground snow.
Okay. Anybody else? I see another hand. Speak up, whoever else has their hand up.
Yes, Anders Gare here. I would say for community feedback on ECC products, the official way is to go through, you go to the government webpage, and you on weather.gc.ca, and you go to contact us, and that will be sent to the National Inquiry Response Team, which directed then to dispatch it then to the teams. We receive a lot of requests through NERD, National Inquiry Response Team, at CMC to the that are sent to the National Coordinator Open Data Access, and often these are about products, and then we redispatch it. So it may be a bit convoluted, but it's one way. It's one way. It's a mechanism that exists where you can that can be used to give feedback on products and services.
Yeah, merci on the day. I think that's a good point, and that's open to everybody, even the public, right? So that's one way, but we should probably give some thought to how do we have two-way communication, which is what Mika brought up earlier, right? So if there's a way to do that, how do we help set priorities as a community for some of the efforts, both research and development, that need to happen, right? There might be some discussion points along those lines. So we'll try to write down some thoughts about that, and we'll go back to the provinces, territories, industry, and others to see how that can work. The other question is, can we influence folks like ECNWF or NOAA, right? And that'd be interesting, right? Because I mean, we do have strong working relationships with NOAA as an example, and I suspect actually at the provincial level, sometimes folks actually do, right? And so, anyways, we throw that out there as something to consider, right? I mean, if it's a global community, right, how do we take advantage of that, right? And there might be some interesting challenges or possibilities with doing that, right? So, anyways, I just throw that out there. I don't know if there's just a strong opinion one way or the other. Okay, and the last point I think that came forward, and we need to sort of address this, is feedback from users, and that's again the community on availability, reliability, and accessibility of products. So the sense I got from that and from some of the discussions, and it's sort of, I think it came out in the workout in the breakout groups was that putting a product out there is great, but it's really hard, I think, and I shouldn't speak for the provinces and territories, to ingest that data into their systems. Their systems are already established, they're already working. Why would you add some complexity to something without understanding what the impacts might be, right? So that's a bit of a more difficult problem, I think, in some ways, right? Because there's probably some really good stuff that's available that would really help the forecast at the end of the day. But I think I mentioned earlier, half the time folks are just trying to deal with crazy questions from the deputy minister's office or whatever. So, how do we bring that together? And I think we've discussed earlier that might be, there might be sort of a research angle there in terms of doing some evaluation on behalf of provinces and sort of making that work. But there might be other mechanisms to do that, to have that two-way communication and to sort of advance help the provinces advance some of their platforms and some of their work, right? So that's kind of where that is coming from. I'm not sure if anybody has a strong feeling one way or the other, but that's I think something we want to try to look at dealing with, as we write the report and as we move forward with this community of practice. So, anybody have any thoughts or comments there? Khaled, you have your hand up.
Yeah, so we've been getting lots of help from ECCC in respect to the weather forecast and from different models. I'm just wondering, because I'm not aware of it, whether they are evaluating their forecast in respect to the performance of any event or something like that. So if we can get some information around that, that would help us to select, like, in which cases, which model is more reliable for us to do the forecast.
Okay. So you're talking about case studies on extreme events, Khaled? Is that what you're thinking about?
Yeah.
Yeah. Fair enough. I know ECC used to do that a long time ago. I don't think they do that anymore, but that's something we can certainly jot down, and maybe there's room for others to do that kind of work too. So that's a good point. Somebody else, sorry, Marie-France, I think, or?
Yes, I'm quite confused between the community feedback line and the feedback from users. Who are the users in this case?
Well, yeah. So I tried to. So it's the same group basically, right? So
okay. So
yes.
So if it's the same group, so where are the end user of your product, not being that community, like us forecaster providing service to other clients? For example, we do provide service on flood to DND. So they are our end user. Do we have a room somewhere to provide you with feedback? Right now, it's very difficult from our perspective to gather the information from your community. I mean, it's spread all across different regions and provinces. I understand that. CMC has a lot of product, but they are also on a multitude of platforms and websites. So it's a challenge to get that. So I would like to see if there is a room for end user forecaster providing services to be able to input this group with comments and suggestions, stuff like that.
Okay, so I think the forecasters are all here, right? So unless you're talking about the public, sorry, Marie-France, maybe I missed your point, but so the community we're talking about is this community of practice, and so those are the forecasters in the provinces, right, that have to deal with the public, right? So they're the ones that say you need to evacuate this town, or you need to clean out your basement because you're going to have a flood. And so those are the people that we're talking about who would hopefully be able to reach back into CMC, right, and get some questions answered about product availability, reliability, or accessibility, right? So I think what we're suggesting here is that moving forward, we'd like to make sure that those lines of communications are open between sort of the national flood guidance people, right, at CMC, and the flood forecasting community in the provinces. Does that make sense? Maybe I'm missing something. Anything else? Derek? Okay, looks like it's okay. Richard, it's quelque chose?
I agree with the answer you just said to Marie-France, because the link with the citizen or the municipalities is the provinces and territory that have to do that. So the way you define community and users is very good. But my comment was more on the last point. I completely agree with what you mentioned, and maybe you can also try to have some feedback on the way we are using your products as maybe example, or for other provinces and territories. Let's say that in Quebec, as mentioned by Dominic, we start to use the result coming from the hydrological forecast, and we try to blind it with or to mix it with our own forecast. And how is it useful? How we do that with the kind of let's say the way we are using it, and how useful it can be. So I think it's there, but I just want to mention to make this clearer for you.
Yeah, merci, Richard. That's great. Yeah, I appreciate that. So that's good. Okay, so I think, unless there's any last comments, I think we've got some good next steps here to think about, and the organizing committee, so that's GWF and ECCC, will start pulling together some thoughts and share it with everybody. So I think the next steps is to, based on this, is to kind of write up a 5-page report, something like that, or maybe 10 pages at the end of the day, and we're going to meet as a organizing committee to figure out how to do that. And then once that's done, we'll share it with our provincial and territorial partners, and some of the key leads in GWF, and we'll end up putting it on the GWF website. We'll also have all the talks available there, and we'll also have video, hopefully from most of the talks, so people can go back and revisit things and have a look. We'll see where this leads. It's still a little bit ambiguous, but I think we've got some really positive steps forward here to take, and I think we can argue that we have developed a community of practice in Canada now, and this is largely it. So certainly appreciate everybody's efforts and time here. So I think Evan, did you want to just say a few thank yous to a few folks, and then we can close off the meeting?
You bet. Thanks, Al. I appreciate it. Yeah, well, first and foremost, thank you to everyone for attending. You made this the event that it was. Obviously, we've limitations of virtual events and such, but I think it was definitely a step in the right direction. So I appreciate everyone's attendance. To the presenters who took the time out of their days and the other issues they face to provide talks on the work that they do and how they're moving the forecasting issues forward, both internationally and nationally. Again, thank you. Really appreciate it. Lastly, I'd be remiss if I didn't thank those organizers who put time in putting everything together, both from Global Water Futures, Prabin, Chris, John, and I apologize, Martin Clark. He helped greatly in working on the agenda. Those at ECCC, Dan, Brendan, Francois, Jacob, Charmaine, Matt, Sheila, James, thank you so much for all the assistance from translation to notes to, and this goes for Prabin and Chris as well, to all of it. Just greatly appreciate everyone's efforts on this, and thank you to Al for shepherding us through. Great. Okay, so thanks for recognizing everybody, Evan. That's great. So I think with that, we've 226 in Saskatoon, so 326. So thank you everybody for attending. We still have 65 people on, which is amazing. So appreciate all that, and we look forward to writing up the report and sharing with folks, and trying to organize the next time we meet and figure all this out. So this has been great. Appreciate everybody's patience with the platform and patience with dealing with all this. And I'll say it. Please, everybody, stay safe, and hopefully, next February, we'll meet somewhere in person and be able to share coffee and drinks and whatever else we want to share. So yeah, appreciate the effort, and take care, everybody, and we'll be in touch. Thank you.